Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The following tale is from 2015. It was posted right before the great skinwalker boom of the mid-2010s. There are several themes in it that are overused nowadays. The creature would today be referred to as a flesh gate. I present to you, The Woman in the Woods.
Alright, here is my story. I won't greentext it because screw greentexting. I grew up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. We had plenty of neighbors, but our ranch was the deepest and furthermost one into the woods. If you kept going after our ranch, you'd only see thick woods and eventually reach a military base after a few hours near the end of the county. Picture is related to making things simple. This is not only my tale but also my dad's and my Uncle Doug. I will begin with the events I experienced firsthand along with my sister and grandfather, then the ones my dad experienced, and then finally with events experienced by Uncle Doug. They all happen in chronological order, and I only came to learn about what Dad and Uncle Doug had seen a long time later. They both had their experiences individually, and Uncle Doug was the one most affected. To this day he will not talk about it, and only talks about what happened to him after a few packs of beer. To begin with, well, I guess it really starts with my mom. Mom comes from a weird family. Weird in the good and funny kinda way most of the time. Her dad was an adventurer, the kinda dude that had a cowboy lifestyle and traveled all over the country doing all kinds of stuff. Granddad saw and did a lot of stuff. He even once claimed to have killed a werewolf and skinned him to make a leather jacket. And it was a weird looking jacket, so we all believed him even though the story probably isn't true. Thing is, even being wacky and a trickster, Granddad had actually seen some stuff, and he sometimes pointed it out in a rather gloomy way. Grandmother, on the other hand, came from a Romanian family, and she was part gypsy. Both Granddad and Grandma believed stupidly in the supernatural, whether because of Granddad's experiences or stuff they saw. This rubbed off on my mom. So, not only was my mom stupidly superstitious, she also claimed to be paranormal sensitive. For instance, she would tell us that when they first moved into the ranch, she'd hear hooves and chains walking all over the roof. She'd tell us about a nicely dressed man that sometimes sat on a log beside our house smoking a cigarette only to walk away and vanish whenever anyone approached. And many other stories. My dad, of course, never experienced or saw any of this, so he would chalk it up as my mom telling us a horror story. Mom was also a horror movie book aficionado, and Uncle Doug would laugh as he never saw it either. Granddad and Grandma, on the other hand, would nod, even though themselves said they never saw anything. Thanks to all this talk, me and my sister were always creating fictional monsters and crap to mess with each other. I won't deny, the place we lived in was spooky, as are all wooden areas, but we got used to it. After all, we lived there. It wasn't until about when we were 6 or 7 that we had our first incident. Dad and Uncle Doug had started clearing a big patch of high grass directly behind our homes. There had been a break-in at a few neighboring ranches, and since Uncle Doug, whose cabin was the closest to the high grass, had a bunch of expensive car parts in his garage. Uncle Doug owned a car repair shop and liked custom cars. They figured out it was best to clear the high grass right up into the treeline so that nobody could approach our homes at night unconcealed. It took them a few days, but on the first day they had already got a big part of it done. It was late afternoon, me and my sister were playing outside in our yard, with a front view of Uncle Doug's cabin and henceforth, the woods and high grass. We were waiting for our parents to get ready because we were going into town to watch Harry Potter. So me and sis are doing kids shit when my sister stops dead in her tracks and starts looking at the high grass. She points. I turn to look and I see this figure standing there. Motionless. It was against the sun, so all we could see was its outline. It was big, and looked vaguely like a person, but yet, from the distance, it also seemed like it looked like a big dead tree, but we never remembered having a tree stump there. We are staring at this person-like silhouette down when I guess both me and Sis got unnerved. We ran to our porch and asked one another what the hell it was. That's when we hear the sound of grass parting, and fucking footsteps, from the fucking high grass. We yelled and ran inside at the same time. Dad comes out with his shotgun, so does Uncle Doug. We tell them about the figure, then about the footsteps. They go out to investigate. Dad sees nothing and goes back inside. Uncle Doug spends a while looking around thinking it might have been a robber. He finds nothing and goes back to doing whatever he was doing. Me and Sis chalked it up as the wind or something. Later that night we are in our room. We shared a room as kids as our house wasn't exactly big. We were up late talking about the Harry Potter movie and how we wanna go to Hogwarts and shit, when we heard this wet thump on the window. We look at each other. Maybe it was the cat, it sometimes did that from inside. Maybe it was locked outside and doing that to get in. So Sis pulls back the drapes to look and jumps back as if she received a shock. There on the fucking window was a pale, fleshy and wet hand. Just laying against the glass. Whomever the hand belonged to was out of sight. It was crouching down low and we couldn't see it. We stood there staring for a few minutes until the hand started tapping its fingers on the glass. Sister was brave enough to jump and pull the drapes close again at that point. We sat there terrified for a while, until we heard a muffled laughter coming from outside. Then the fucking sound of someone pulling the window up. I think screaming too much makes you zone out, because all I remember happening next is grandfather kicking our door in, shotgun in hands and turning white when he looked at the drapes, which now fluttered in the wind thanks to the open window. Grandfather regains his posture, moves towards the window, fires a shot outside and yells,
"I'm calling the police."
Police come. Look around with Dad and Uncle Doug. Once again nothing found. Granddad refuses to describe who he saw, just grunting and nodding whenever asked. Granddad never told us what he had seen. From the door he must have had a good look at it as it pulled the window up. He installed deadbolts on the windows and told us to make sure those are locked. Fast forward a couple of days. I'm sitting in Uncle Doug's chair watching him and my dad cut down the high grass, when out in the edge of the woods I spot what seems to be some white-furred animal sprinting towards my dad. It was huge. I could not make out the details, but I could see the top of its back and the grass parting in front of it. White and furry. I stand up and yell at the top of my lungs. My first thought was that it was a bear of some kind and it was charging my dad. Dad looks up at me confused, not making out anything I'm saying. He turns around, looks around and comes over. The grass is still, there's no sign of the animal that was charging just a minute ago. I start telling him about it and he just looks at me saying, and goes back to work. He never thought there was an animal and just presumed I was imagining things. Years later my dad would tell me just what he had seen just a day after the one above. It was late afternoon. Sun was already down, and Dad was out clearing the last patch of high grass, right up in the tree line. He was nearly done when he started noticing what he described as a thick copperish smell. At first he thought the grass trimmer he was using was malfunctioning, but even after turning it off, the smell kept getting stronger. He looked around for the source of it and directly behind him, standing in the shadow of the tree line was what looked to be a person. He could only make out its outline, but it was a human silhouette. It was clearly a man, bare-chested, standing with his arms half open at his sides. What was off about it was that it appeared to have either horns, or what looked like tree branches sprouting from behind his head. Dad yelled for whoever was there to show themselves or fuck off his property. The figure said nothing, and Dad noticed it seemed to close the distance quite fast, without actually moving. Dad had the bladed grass trimmer instead of the cord version, so he heaved it up and prepared to use it as a weapon. He once again yelled for whatever it was to get out of the property and started calling for Uncle Doug. That moment, he states the thing simply turned its back to him and quickly ran towards the woods, without seeming to move. It made what he described as an animalistic, trumpeting sound just before it disappeared. Dad walked back home and tried to figure out what it was. He ended up concluding it was a hobo, and that he was just tired and imagined the rest. The thing I forgot in the last part is that the smell vanished when the thing ran away. It became stronger according to my dad as it was advancing, and instantly vanished along with the thing once it ran away. Now for Uncle Doug's bit, who happens to be the one who had the longest incident with whatever it was. Let me describe Uncle Doug a bit. Obviously Doug is a fictitious name. Uncle Doug was your usual, lumberjack-looking dude. Tall as sin, big bushy beard, built like a brick wall, somewhat with a gut but still intimidating. Uncle Doug was the honey badger of the family, as in, he didn't care. The man was the kinda guy that could run his own hand through with a screwdriver then go have a beer with the thing still in his hand. Uncle Doug was tough, is what I'm getting at. One day, a while after my dad had this experience, Uncle Doug was out in the woods for whatever reason. He had his gun and his dog with him. He had spent most of his day out doing outdoor, survivalist crap, and I do believe he intended to camp out that day because he had brought a tent and a sleeping bag with him. It's about 5 and Doug is preparing to set camp for the night. He is in the process of getting a fire started and setting his tent when he starts feeling a weird smell. Guess what? The same copperish metallic smell my dad felt. Doug actually described it as the smell you get when you heat up a piece of iron with a blowtorch, or leave one of those old clothes iron run hot for too long. The smell lingers for about an hour as Doug sets up camp. He is scratching his head trying to figure out where the smell is coming from, all the while it's getting progressively stronger, when his dog starts losing it. It starts barking and recoiling in fear at the same time. Doug goes over to calm him down and nearly gets his hand eaten. He starts yelling at the dog to quiet down when he notices there's someone standing in front of them, just far away enough to be barely visible at the light from the fire. In that light he could only see its lower half up to its waist, and it appears to be a naked woman. At first Doug thought it had been some woman who got lost or kidnapped into the woods by some rednecks, and his first thought was of offering help. But the way the dog is freaking out makes him keep his distance. He asks her if she is okay and gets no response. He asks again and she starts heaving in response. He grabs his gun from the floor, and when he turns back to look at the woman, she is suddenly way closer. Now he can fully see her, completely naked, not injured as far as he can tell, staring and smiling at him. Doug is getting creeped out and tries to touch her in the shoulder only to find her back in the place she was at first. He never even saw her move. Doug talks to her again and she still remains silent. Doug decides to leave and starts kicking his stuff together. He turns for a moment to get the dog's chain from where he tied it, and the minute he turns back she is right in his face. He backs away tugging at the chain to get the dog close to him, but once he turns to look again she is nowhere to be seen. Doug decides to book it and leaves with only the dog, the gun and a flashlight. It's about 7 and completely dark. Doug is walking the woods flashing the light in all directions, with the dog still freaking out and the strong metallic odor still present. He keeps seeing a shaking silhouette in the corner of his vision edging closer, but nothing there when he sees it. The smell is still there and he starts hearing muffled voices, as if someone is talking far behind him. Farther down the trail, he starts hearing a heavy thumping sound. As if a large bull is charging him. He turns quickly and something slams him in the chest. All the air goes out of his lungs and he loses the chain, and the dog just abandons him. Scrambling to his feet, he hears the thumping circling him, and, getting the gun and the light, scrambles up a tree. The smell is still unbearably strong and Doug can hear the impatient thumping at the base of the tree. He reaches a branch large enough to sit and fires 2 shots down at random. The thumping dies down and Doug starts scanning the area with the flashlight. Nothing to be seen anywhere. A few minutes pass and the voices come back. Really far away, then around him, then at the base of the tree. Doug keeps scanning the area and flashes the trail he came from, only to see the figure of the woman with her back turned to him. She is shaking and jerking her limbs in weird quick motions, almost seizure-like. She heaves and laughs, and Doug swears it sounds more like a goat making trumpet sound than a laugh. He stays up there for the rest of the night. The smell starts to die down at about 2 a.m., and as the sun is coming up it has vanished. However, he waits until midday before coming down. Shotgun in hand, he doubles back to his campsite only to find his tent and sleeping bag destroyed. As if something had trampled it several times. Doug books it to the ranch and doesn't tell anyone what had happened. He says the dog simply ran away, it hadn't come back, and that he had fallen down a creek. Later that day my dad comes to talk to him and asks why he had come back in the middle of the night only to head back again. Apparently, Doug had returned at about 3 a.m., called my dad from the yard in a super deep voice and asked if the kids were okay. He then had stood there in the shadows for a few long moments before returning to his cabin. Dad thought he had left early in the morning to go back for his stuff. Dad had assumed Doug was drunk and thought nothing of it. Doug, however, was still sitting up the tree during that time, which makes us ask ourselves the question of who the fuck had been there standing in the yard asking about us. Doug said nothing, although he later admitted he had never felt so scared about anything in his life, and never ventured into the woods again. We moved about 2 years later to Dallas, and nobody said anything or put 2 and 2 together until years later we got together for a big family reunion when I was home from college, and sat talking about our old home. Everyone was scared shitless of it and I still feel uneasy talking about it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.